Hi guys, so this video is going to be a really beginner's guide to Cascade, the older of the two particle systems used in Unreal Engine 4. Cascade is being gradually replaced with a different system called Niagara, which I'll come onto in a different video. What we're going to do today is make this particle system here, which has 3 emitters, one for these flames, one for these embers, and one for this smoke. And I'm going to do this using only stuff that you find in the starter content, because you're guaranteed to have that stuff on your machines or can have it. Now, just so you know, if you go on the Epic Games launcher, you can download this project from the Learn tab, I think it's on, called Particle Effects, which gives you this cave environment with lots of different particle systems going on. So there's flames, weird swirling particles here, drifting water, and if we go outside, which I think is this way, there's also this blizzard effect going on, which is, I think, a bunch of different particle systems all layered on top of each other. So you can go and download this if you want. This obviously uses materials which are not found in the starter content, which is why for this video I'm just going to stick to starter content stuff and we're going to build this. So first of all then, right click in your content browser, say we're creating a new particle system, and we'll give this a name. I'm just going to call this Flame Torch. It might be a little bit big for this, but you'll see how you could adjust this to make like a flaming torch effect, which is kind of what I was heading towards here, and then I made the flames maybe a little bit bigger just to show you something more and how you would do that. So we've made our new particle system, double click that to open it, and you'll see by default we have one emitter, so one column. I'll come back to that in a second, and all it's doing by default is squirting these particles with this default texture on up into the air. If we drop that particle system into the world like you would drop in a mesh or anything else, you'll see that's all it's doing. Okay, so back over in our Cascade Editor. To explain a bit about this, I say this is aimed at the beginner really. You would have in Cascade multiple columns where each one represents a particle emitter within this particle system. Now here we only have one emitter, so we have just the one column. Then each column can have rows on it to specify something about this particle. So think of each one of these rows as controlling an aspect of the particle emitter. So how long do the particles last its lifetime, how big are they, initial size, initial velocity, how fast are they moving in which direction, and what color are they over their life. So to start with, we'll go into the required row and just switch out this material. Like, obviously a material is required. We can't have particles without a material because they wouldn't be visible. We're going to change this to the Fire Sub UV, M-Fire Sub UV, which is in the starter content. And the first thing you'll notice is this looks a little bit weird, so let me explain what's going on here. If we go and find this material in the content browser by clicking on the magnifying glass next to where I specified it, then open the material. Then if we scroll across to the texture the texture it's using, which is this one, Particle Sub UV, and again select that, click on the magnifying glass next to this to open that image, and see here. So this is that image that our particles are basically using, where we have 6 by 6 grid of images, and you can see what's meant to happen. You're meant to animate through these over the life of the particle. At the moment, they're all just using the entire sheet, so we need to stop that from happening. So back in Cascade, on required, scroll down, and you've got this sub UV area where we can specify how many images there are in the horizontal and vertical directions. That is 6 and 6 in our case. And how do we want Unreal to move between them? We will say linear blend. What linear blend will do is, instead of just flicking from one image to the next at a certain time, it will actually smoothly blend, like interpolate between them, so it will give a better effect. At the moment though, notice they're all just using this top image here. We're not actually animating through, so we need to set that up next. What you do to that, we need to add another row to our particle emitter. So right click on a blank piece of the emitter and select Sub UV, Sub Image Index. Think of it, this row is saying how to move through the sub images on that one larger image. And what we want to do here is specify 2 points. Now this is something you're going to see over and over again in Cascade throughout this video. We have 2 points or more, mainly 2, where each point has an in value representing how far through the particle's life something should happen, and an out value representing what should happen, and we'll leave it at that for now. So here we have an in value of 0 saying at the start of the particle's life, out value use image 0. Think of image 0 as being this image here, and these are numbered from 0 to 35. And at the end of the particle's life, so in value of 1, we want to be on image 35. Some of the documentation for this sub-image index row is a little confusing, but I believe that's how it works. And you can see here, the particles are now smoothly moving through all of the images on this sheet. Okay, I think we're done with that, so let's sort out the next few things. notice how at the bottom it looks really bad because they're all using that same image in the same orientation, and there's this repeating flickering effect. If you don't like that, which I don't, we can tell each particle to have a random rotation by right-clicking again in the emitter and saying rotation, initial rotation. And by default, that will give each one a random rotation between 0 and 1, where 1 is rotated 360 degrees, 0.25 will be 90, 0.5 will be 180, you get the idea. So we don't need to set anything up in this because it's doing what we want already. Now let's sort out the colour. We will go into the Colour over Life tab. So if you think of it, this image is specifying how bright an area should be, and the colour we can add on afterwards using this Colour over Life. And again, you'll find if you go Colour over Life, Distribution, Constant Curve, we've got 2 points again, with point 0 having an in value of 0, meaning the start of the particle's life, and point 1 having an in value of 1, meaning the end of the particle's life. And then we can specify colours. Now, if we just put 1, 0, 0, you can see what I mean here. So the particles at the 0 point in their life are starting off just red, and we could say for an out value, this isn't how it's going to end up, I'm just doing this just to show you, we'll have just green. So they start off red and turn green. Now here's something, because if you look at the material we're using, our output is wired into the emissive channel, which, as you may know, you can put values higher than 1 into this to get like a much brighter glowing effect, and that's what we want. So for our initial, our 0.1 colour, I'm going to say I want 40 in red by 10 in green and 2 in blue, so I get this kind of bright fire effect going on. And you can mess with this however you want. Like if you want flames that are green, you can put a high value in green, a lower value in red maybe, and no blue to get the exact colour you want. I'm going to stick to what I said just, so 40, 10, 2, I quite like that. And then for the end of their life, I'm going to have them just fade to just red, so I want 20, 0, 0. So I can see here the particles are starting off with a little bit of green and blue mixed in to get this yellow effect, and then they're fading to be just red over the course of their life. And just a little bit, let's talk a bit more about these in values for lifetimes. So if I wanted my particles to turn purely red at the halfway point in their life, I'd have an in value of 0.5, and you can see here they're becoming red halfway through their lives. If we wanted that to happen a quarter of the way through their lives, I'd have an in value of 0.25, so now they're turning red much further down. I'm going to leave mine on 1, but you can adjust this to be however you want your particles to look. Now the sizes, we haven't looked what size they are. So the initial size row, which was there by default, and they're all the same size, they're all 25 by 25 by 25. So to give a bit of variance, I'm going to say the maximum size can be 40, 40, 40, just tabbing through those boxes in X, Y, and Z, and the minimum can be 20, 20, 20. So now some of these particles are bigger than others. Like they won't just be either 20 or 40, they can be any number rolled randomly in between. So it gives a bit of variance to our effect. Next thing, let's look at size. So that, well, yeah, let's look at size over life. So that's initial size. If we right-click and go size by life, we can have the particles change size over the course of their life. Now at the moment, again, we've got the same system of 2 points, in value 0 for start of life, in value 1 for end of life, and notice the out values are all set to 1, which means it will just be whatever we set in initial size multiplied by 1, so no change. If we change, for example, all the in values to 0, you'll notice the particles essentially start off with their sizes multiplied by 0, and then gradually sort of grow out to their full size over the course of their lifetimes. I don't really want them starting off at 0, I want them starting off smaller but not completely invisible, so I'm going to go with 0.4 for all of my initial sizes. So yeah, so the particles start off a little bit smaller and then grow to be their full size that was set in initial size by the end of their life. The next thing we need to look at is 2 more things. Initial velocity, which was already there. Now what's happening here is most of their velocity you can see is in the Z direction here, where they have a minimum of 50 velocity in Z and a maximum of 100, and these are both positive values, which is why all the particles are moving upwards. If one of our Zs had a negative value, say if I change this to minus 50, you'll see some of the particles can go downwards. We don't want that, so we'll leave Z on positive 50. I don't want there to be any X and Y velocity though, because that's kind of causing them to spread out to the sides. We will look more in detail at that when we do the ember effects in a second, but for the flames, I want zeros in their min-max X and Y. So now you can see them rising just upwards as a column of flame. They're still growing as they age, which makes it look like they're fanning out a bit, but there is only upwards velocity here. And we've got 150 here. Let's bring those closer. So I don't really want some of these to be moving much faster than others. So if we say we'll have a maximum velocity of 80 in Z and a minimum of 60, that gets them all to be closer together, I guess. And then, should we mess with the lifetime of them? Well, just to show you, we'll go into the lifetime thing. So particles, this is in seconds, particles can live for a minimum of however long, let's say 0.8, and a maximum of, again, however long, let's say 1. I don't really want these, I don't want the particles to have drastically different lifetimes, and I'll show you why. If I turn max up to something like 2, now we can see we have an issue where some of these particles are living much longer, and it's kind of breaking up this flame effect. So I want to keep their lifetime min-max quite close together. So some of the flames are licking up a little bit higher, but most of them are all moving together. And if we look at this in our world now, we have this. Okay, so there's our flames. This is the one that was already done. I'll just delete that. Next thing then, the embers that we're flicking off to the sides. So what we want to do here is go back into Cascade. We'll right click over here somewhere and press New Particle Sprite Emitter, which will give us a brand new emitter like this. If you have not the default texture on here, don't worry, it just means that you left a texture or material rather selected in the content browser. Because I didn't have one selected, I've got these defaults again. Now notice both emitters are named particle emitter, which might get confusing, so we'll click on our flames emitter that we've just done and just rename that to flames. Then we'll go over to the second one that we just added and rename that to embers, and eventually we'll have a smoke one as well. So first things first, for the required, what material are we going to use? We're going to use one that's built in called Radial Gradient, Radial Gradient. Again, that's from the starter content. Now what that is, it might not be very clear from here, so if I just press magnifying glass to go to the material, open the material, and just put that onto a plain preview and rotate around for you. See, a radial gradient is basically something that's just fully opaque in the middle and then fades to transparency across a radius. So like a fading circle. And I'll tell you what, for now, let's just switch off the flames. So see, our emitters each have like a little tick next to them where we can switch on and off certain emitters. We want to switch off flames now, so we can just see these embers. And we'll set these up now. First of all, those are way too big. So initial size, I'm going to have maximum of 3 and minimum of 2 in X, Y, Z, so they're much, much smaller. Color over life, I want to use the exact same settings as we used for our fire. So what was that? 0.0 had in value 0 and then 4021 for RGB, I think it was, or 4022, no it wasn't, it was 4010.2. Again, you can use whatever colors you like to suit your particle effect. And at the end of the life, so 0.1 with an in value of 1, they were just red, weren't they? So 2000. So now you see we've got the same thing going on with our embers. They're starting off one color and fading just to red. Initial velocity then. Now here I definitely do want them to spread out a bit. So unlike our flames where we only wanted upward velocity, I want these to fan out to the sides a bit. So let's start off with say 50x, 50y, this is maximum, and minus 50x, minus 50y in minimum. So now they're kind of squirting out to the sides. If I now unhide the flames emitter, see how that looks? Yeah, for me they're spurting out a bit too much to the side. So I'm going to take all these 50s and minus 50s and change them to 30s and minus 30s instead. So max xy 30 30, min xy minus 30 minus 30. That looks a little bit better, how the embers are sticking closer to the upwards flame column now. And I'll use the same velocities, so 80 and 60. You can change that to if you want your embers to be moving slightly faster than the flames, that's up to you. Now spawning, it looks like there's too many of these coming off. I'm not quite sure, I don't really have a specific material in mind that we're burning here, but it looks like there's a bit too many of these embers coming out. So what we'll do is go in the spawn row, and let's just mess around with the constant a bit. So as you may expect, if I turn this up from 20 to 200, we get many, many more of these. That's not how I would expect like a flaming torch to be, unless we're burning some kind of liquid or something very loose, like paper maybe. I'm going to dial this down to 10. So then we've got mainly just flames with the occasional ember spurting out from the sides. That's much more the effect that I want. But since embers would rise above the flames before fading, we'll give them a higher lifetime. So embers can have minimum lifetime of 1, maximum of 1.5 seconds. So no, yeah, see, we should start to see some of them rising up above the flames, as you would expect, before they sort of fizzle out. Last thing I want to do to these is give them a little bit more of a chaotic motion. So see at the minute, their initial velocity gets rolled out. That's what they're sticking with and just going in that direction and doing nothing else. I'm going to add something called an orbit. So right click, orbit, orbit, and this is going to get to look weird at first because the values aren't going to be right for us. See how they're having this extremely strange spinning movement at the minute? We need to change that to make it more subtle. So if I go in orbit and change min max y to 10 and minus 10 respectively, see now they have this slight orbiting motion where the embers are not just moving in a straight line but are kind of drifting around a bit. It makes it look like they're being blown around by the heat from the fire, which is the effect that I want. And that will do for the emitters. For the embers, sorry, there is going to be another emitter, but first of all, let's have a look how this looks in the world. So yeah, that's not doing too bad, is it? Next thing then, the smoke, which is going to be, because of the nature of the smoke sprite, it's going to be a little bit difficult to see in the particle editor. So I'm going to keep flicking back into the world so you can see what's going on. So right click over here, new particle sprite emitter. Oh, and here see that thing that I was talking about. So because I'd left this material selected and Radial Gradient, it's used that instead of the default material for particles, which we don't actually want this material, so I'm going to change that. But first of all, let's rename the emitter to smoke. Then we'll go in required, change the material to the smoke material, which again, msmoke sub UV, which is part of the starter content. And just like with our flames, this is multiple images all on the same sheet. So we scroll down in required, we say how many there are, which in this case is 8 by 8. And again, we have the issue where they're all just using that first cell, if you want to call it that. So we want to go back into here, and just like with our flames, right click, add a sub UV image index thing, row, and then say over the particle's life, which images are we using. So there's 8 by 8 images, so that's 64, numbered 0 through 63, and we'll say at 0 point in your life, you're using image 0. At the 1 point in the end of your life, you're using image 63. Again, I apologize if I've got the math, the way that works slightly wrong. It is a little bit confusing, the words in the documentation, I think. And what else do we need? Well, again, like with our flames, we'll have a random initial rotation. So rotation, initial rotation. And let's have a look now what is going on. Yeah, right, so we've got this. So a few problems. First of all, there's way too much smoke. Maybe if we were burning like a very wet wood or paper or something, we'd have all this smoke coming up. But I want a much more subtle smoke effect. And I don't want the smoke starting right at the bottom here. So notice, if we click on the particle system, all three of our emitters are spawning from where the origin is, which seems logical and usually is, but it's not quite what we want in this case, not for our smoke anyway. So we go back into Flame Torch, under Required, for the smoke emitter. Notice you've got this emitter origin, so you can offset where the emitter is. So if I put, and this is going to be way too high a value to show you, if I put 100 in Z, you can see how the smoke emitter is now 100 units in Unreal above where the origin is. As I say, that's a little too much, so let's dial that back to, say, 30. And now the smoke is just, see, so the smoke is starting not right at the bottom, but it's a little further up. And what I want to do is, first of all, have there be less of it, because that looks like too much smoke to me. So I'm going to go into Spawn and change the rate down to 5. Looks a little better. And then I don't like the way the smoke's just kind of popping in. What I want to do is, well, first of all, darken it using Color Over Life. And also, Color Over Life has a separate setting for Alpha Over Life, so Transparency Over Life. So we're going to start them off fully transparent, fade them into about 0.8 visibility, and then fade them back out to transparency again. So back in Flame Torch, Color Over Life. Now, Color Over Life, I don't know that I want the colour to actually change over the life, I just want it to be darker. So think of it, if we were to multiply all the RGB values of this smoke by, say, 0.25, it would be the same, exact same thing, but dark, like a darker grey. So for value 1, we'll go 0.25, 0.25, 0.25, and then for the out value, oh no, maybe we'll get them Would smoke get slightly lighter as it ages? Let's put 0.4, 0.4, 0.4. I think in the demonstration one that I had, these were all 0.25, so the colour would never change over the life. So you might think, well, why not just use the initial colour row? Well, as I said, it's because colour over life also has this alpha over life, where we can say, again, there's a number of points, and here we have 2. Yeah, how transparent is this particles over their life? Now we actually want 3 points because we press add, a point for the start of the life, a point for halfway through the life, and a point for the end of the life. And we'll go to these one after the next now. So at the start of the life, in value 0, our alpha value wants to be 0, so fully transparent. At halfway through the life, so in value 0.5, the out value wants to be, say, 0.8, so almost fully visible, but still a little bit transparent. And then for 0.2, we'll say at the end of the life, so in value of 1, and out value of 0 again, so fully see-through. So what will happen is these will fade into being visible and then fade back out again as they get older. So that you don't have this weird popping effect for the smoke anymore, and they're fading away. So that is basically the effect that I wanted to make. So I hope that's been a useful introduction to how Cascade works. You can obviously change any of the settings we've gone through to make your own effects. So if you want more flames going in different directions, more embers, different coloured smoke, whatever you want, do that. But that will wrap it up for this. I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.